Hi, I'm Dennis Weiss for Eagle Communications. We're presenting Why Like Ike, another wonderful story about a wonderful guy, Dwight David Eisenhower. We're here at the Presidential Library. We're actually in the museum today in the back room. Back rooms are very interesting here. We have Pam Sanfilippo in the middle, Tim Reeves over there, and they're my content experts. They tell me what we're talking about and then do the talking, so I like that. Pam, good morning.
Good morning.
And what are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about Eisenhower and the National Park Service.
National Park Service. See, this will be a new topic for me in Eisenhower. So you have me at a complete disadvantage today. So where do we start with Eisenhower and the National Park Service?
Well, this year is the 100th anniversary of the establishment of the National Park Service, and while Eisenhower was president, he was instrumental in starting some work being done in the parks for what was called Mission 66, which was the 50th anniversary of the Park Service, but they started planning 10 years before while Eisenhower was president. So that's one of the connections, making it current for today. And then there were numerous parks established under his presidency and administration.
You know, the national parks in general in America, they're synonymous. You know, we were open land. Look at how we started from the East Coast and worked our way to the West and the various milestones along the way. But America is a land of still great vastness. We live in Kansas. I'm always amused when I hear somebody who pretends to be much wiser than us say, talk about overpopulation. You could put the population of the world in Kansas and still have room left over for the rest of the world. But it's a country of vastness and beautiful resources.
And there are 5 national parks in Kansas. Several historic sites, Fort Larned, Fort Scott, Nicodemus, Tallgrass Prairie Preserve, and then another one directly related to Eisenhower Brown versus Board of Education.
Right. That was a very important judicial happening, civil rights happening. That all happened during the Eisenhower administration, and still today kids in school are studying about that every day somewhere in a civics class.
And you can really see then how the history unfolds with Fort Scott being on the old military road at the western frontier of America, United States at that time. And then the Nicodemus African American colony post-Civil War. And then of course Fort Larned on the Santa Fe Trail, so you're seeing that westward expansion. And then, of course, the mid-1950s with civil rights, so all those important landmarks along the way.
Do we have content in the museum and the archives, a library about Eisenhower specifically and how he felt about national parks, or are we just relying on what was done as evidence?
There is various information. First of all, his support for Mission 66. He wrote several letters to Congress to support it. It was a huge undertaking for the parks to build infrastructure. Pull out a little bit of my notes on it. Was a 10-year program to upgrade facilities, staffing, and resource management throughout the system by the 50th anniversary. They anticipated that visitation would increase to 80 million by 1966 on that 50th anniversary, and they up to that point, they had about 50 million visitors a year, so they wanted to prepare for that with visitor service facilities, things like that.
From what I can see over your shoulder, there's a very amusing number there. It says 1955 budget was $43,494,000. $43 million, right?
Right.
We didn't get an email. We didn't get a website built for that in the last federal program to roll out. I think there were 62, then 122 million, and they're still working on a website. Maybe part of that's inflation, but we're sitting at the home of Dwight David Eisenhower, one of the greatest organizers the world has ever seen. That's what that was part of his genius, wasn't it, Tim?
Oh, it really was, and I think one thing important with Mission 66, that modernization and that increased attendance, and some of those big parks now, you have to have a reservation 2 or 3 years in advance to visit or camp there. And so that, again, that sort of foresight was needed to anticipate the demand, which of course continues to grow. And again, that's the kind of thing that Ike was so good at, was that sort of planning. As he always said, plans are nothing, planning's everything. So that even appeals. You know, I think one other interesting connection is Teddy Roosevelt was Ike's one of his two favorite presidents. The other was Abraham Lincoln.
Okay, didn't know that.
One thing he really admired about Lincoln was the Homestead Act, which of course distributed land to individual farmers instead of it just being taken largely by large companies. And then conservation. He admired Theodore Roosevelt's conservation. Was very concerned with conservation of natural resources, so forest and just the sort of vast lands as you described out west. So it was a very, very large concern in terms of his public policy.
When we film these programs, I'm always surprised by something, and I think I was first surprised when I walked in here today and you told me we were doing this, because I always think of Theodore Roosevelt when you think of parks and you think of the conservation era, and had never given a thought to Eisenhower. Yet Pam came today prepared to tell us what Eisenhower did in this area, and it's a pleasant surprise for me, Pam.
Well, his home in Gettysburg is actually a unit of the National Park Service today. He donated that to the federal government for the national parks a couple of years, 1967, I believe, before he passed away, 2 years later. So, but Mamie was allowed to stay in the home, and it wasn't opened to the public until after she passed in 1980. It opened to the public. So.
And we're going to do some other things today, and I'm looking around the room, and they won't get to see them until we turn the camera at them. But, we sit here and we talk about topics about Eisenhower. And just in this room, we're in the middle of his administration and his history, what's surrounding us on the placards. And I think of the fact that we can get to these national parks as citizens and have access to them. It's a huge undertaking that we have benefit to, and the systems that connect them, the highways and the byways and all the things that make our parks available to us as citizens is awfully cool. A lot of it points to Dwight David Eisenhower.
And there are, in addition to Eisenhower's home, about 40 sites associated with presidents. And so there's at least one for each president. I'm sure there'll be more in the future as those sites are commemorated. But Eisenhower established, I'm not sure the exact number, Pam, but it's a fairly long list.
Yes, I didn't count them.
Number of battle sites, Civil War battle sites, including some where my family was involved. So I've been able to experience those. Yeah, particularly it was the Battle of Pea Ridge.
Pea Ridge, yeah.
And or as my family side called it, Elkhorn Tavern. and it's considered the best, I guess, preserved large battlefield.
That's not very far from us. People watching
really
here
not?
could drive down and see that.
Wilson's Creek battlefield's another Civil War that I had a connection to. But it's a wide variety that he established, not just battlefields, but also, of course, wilderness areas. And Franklin Roosevelt Memorial, Bent's Old Fort in Colorado, which was an important site in westward expansion. And of course, Eisenhower loved history. And so I'm sure it gave him great pleasure to be able to preserve those sites for his fellow citizens to enjoy years down the road.
We often, before the cameras come on, have a conversation about young people when we're here. You work with young people all the time, and the education programs here at this facility are part of the vitality and the sustainability of the legacy of Eisenhower. To me, this is another topic about young people. This work is never done for the people of the current generation. When you're preserving a national park, it's for the next generation and the generation after that. Preserving our country and our history and the access to it, much like where we're sitting in a museum. That's a natural museum there.
Exactly. Yeah, they call it a classroom without walls for the entire National Park Service.
What else have you got for us?
Well, there's also a connection to the uniform that park rangers wear. This is a World War II short jacket called an Ike Jacket, and the Park Service, one of the uniform options that they have to wear is an Ike Jacket. The entire Park Service uniform is based on the Army for years before the Park Service was established, there were national parks, and the Army was mostly responsible for maintaining those and taking care of facilities and welcoming visitors. Many of the original superintendents were Army officers, so there's that connection with Ike, and the Ike Jacket was one of those. So this is just a World War II jacket, similar to what the Park Service would wear.
My family history of uncles and grandfathers and stuff, you know, you when you're little, you hear all those stories, and sometimes you don't put the linkage together until you grow up and have the opportunity to be exposed to people like you. But, you know, as you look back through the CC camps, the Conservation Corps went around, built a lot of stuff, and those was a godsend from the Depression, you know, those opportunities to work. But it was also building infrastructure in our country. And where I grew up, which is Southwest Colorado, many of those projects were all connected with parks and connected with national forest and things to improve the quality of the public land and the infrastructure in that. And that's an interesting thought that I hadn't had until you just said that.
Well, and Eisenhower actually worked some with the CCC when he was at the War Department in the early 30s.
Oh, really?
In fact, we have pictures of him inspecting CCC camps.
Oh, no kidding.
And was offered a job with the Works Progress Administration, which administered those camps, but went on to an assignment with General MacArthur in the Philippines.
Yeah, you know, you think of the huge fire going up in Canada, and we had our own little fire this winter, and thank you. She could tell I was going to reach for something, couldn't she? So as I think about that, you know, I watched the firefighting crew grow out of that Conservation Corps and the national parks, and that's where the ability to fight these fires and the organization that fight these fires came from. And little did we know that we would be managing vast reaches of forest for the benefit of the world here in America. And it really is, you know, we ship timber, finished products and raw timber all over the world, and a lot of that is managed from the overgrowth of our national parks.
And that's what Eisenhower, in terms of conservation, was for, was that wise use that Theodore Roosevelt was also, that there is a compromise of use as well as conservation, and to find that balance. And of course, balance was always key with Ike.
Yeah, that's one of my things I love. Had this thought this morning about a different portion of my life, but balance is everything in everything. And Eisenhower as a leader, these are small. Sam, I need a bigger pair.
If it doesn't fit.
If it doesn't fit, you can't.
You know, one thing I'll mention before it leaves my mind, we mentioned the other presidential National Park Service sites. We are the only National Archives Presidential Library to operate a Boyhood home. There are other presidential libraries that are near Boyhood homes, but they're run by the National Park Service or somebody else. And also, it's hard to tell because there's been so many improvements to the grounds over the years that we are a historic site. And in the future, we would like to develop that more and have more interpretation about, you know, Eisenhower's neighborhood and the fact that this was once used, land was used to pasture the cattle who came up the Chisholm Trail.
Yeah.
Another interesting aspect of that, when they were building the visitor center in 1975, and they were excavating the parking lot behind Ike's home, they struck some kind of object with a grater, and it turned out to be the foundations of a blacksmith shop.
No kidding.
From those Cowtown days, and Ike was probably never aware that was in his backyard, which would have tickled him, being such a fan of the Old West. And then the neighbor across the street, George Dudley, had been a deputy marshal to Hickok. And so there's so much I think we could do to tell the story of this site, because again, like other presidential libraries, we are on a historic site.
Now that I've got my mind focused on these small gloves, it's hard to get back to the point. I think these are Trump gloves, by the way. Sam gave them to me. I don't know. But anyway, so here we go. Balance. We were talking off camera about Eisenhower could put up with some things and other people couldn't, and I suggested George Patton would have been a good aide-de-camp for the Khrushchev meeting, right? Eisenhower had the ability to balance intellectual thought and emotional control and geopolitical pictures of a different size and shape than most of his peers at the time could. He could see the world through through a lens that covered 360 degrees. Really remarkable. You know, I grew up enjoying the national parks around us, and I grew up also under the burden of the national parks around us from some of the lack of balance of use. And, you know, as I look forward, as we preserve, whether it's here on this facility or whether it's the national parks around Southwest Colorado and the other places where other people enjoy, it will be balance that saves those things. It will be the ability to see all of the benefits to all of the people and not just a narrow view.
And that's exactly what the Park Service was established to do in many cases. The first national park was Yellowstone, established by a former general who became president, Ulysses S. Grant, in 1872, to preserve that and protect it so that, you know, as we were hitting that period of the
expansion after Civil War.
Expansion and the Gilded Age, as they called it, where these wealthy businessmen were gathering up property. They wanted to make sure that this was preserved for all of America to come, no matter your wealth or status. And the difference between the national parks and the preservation and something like national forests is national forests are administered by the Department of Agriculture. They're considered a resource that can be used. In the Park Service lands, most of it is protected from that for preservation for the
Now, the reason
public.
that Sam snuck in and gave me the gloves is because somebody foolishly left a folder on my side of the table over here. What's in there?
That is the report for Mission 66.
Wow.
Explaining what they were going to do at each at each park to improve the infrastructure. A lot of the visitor centers that are built that you see today at national parks were a result of Eisenhower's support for Mission 66.
So I don't see Smokey the Bear on that.
No.
Pam will tell you why.
Smokey the Bear is actually part of the National Forest Service.
Okay.
But the National Park Service uniform includes the hat that we call Smokey
and
the Bear.
that symbol, I mean, the whole badge thing there, the arrowhead with the pine tree, they kind of share that, don't they? Interesting. Okay.
So.
I just was really hoping there was going to be an Eisenhower and the Smokey the Bear connection that you were going to fill me in on today.
Well, we do have Ike's campaign hat from World War I era that looks just like a
Very
Park
similar.
Ranger's hat.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay. What exciting things don't we know?
Well, we mentioned some of the parks that were established under Eisenhower's administration, and we mentioned a little bit about Brown versus Board of Education. The other significant one, I think, that Eisenhower probably never thought of at the time would become a national park is Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas, where
The placard behind town.
Yes, where that today is still an operating high school, and yet it's also a unit of the National Park Service to commemorate the Little Rock Nine and also Eisenhower's actions sending in the federal troops to protect those students.
We've talked about this a couple times in our Why Like Ike programs. You know, when I go outside of these walls and talk to people, I think the general public is still a little bit, Eisenhower was involved in civil rights, how? And that's the seminal event of where the federal government took action on behalf of the modernization of the view of civil rights in America, and it was done by that guy.
That's right. He had to walk a really fine line. In fact, they made pains really to say that we're not going there to enforce integration. We're going there to enforce a federal court order.
Right.
And so that way,
the rule of law.
That's right. So his Southern opponents could not accuse him of trying to force integration. But so
again, brilliant balance, if nothing else but in words. But you know, words that were balanced with what he did as a deed. He did have the authority to send the 101st Airborne there, and he had it because he had the right to enforce federal law.
And he also understood the symbolism of the first division into Normandy on D-Day.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
there was obviously
Yeah.
some thought put into that as well.
Wow, I'm sure we're out of time. We held up the two fingers a little bit ago. Thanks for introducing me to a whole new topic about Eisenhower today, Pam. I really appreciate it, have enjoyed it. I'm probably going to be bugging you on email to learn some more because this is a new thing with Eisenhower is exciting for me.
Great.
So thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. We're
Always
going
happy
to
to
turn the
share.
camera off today on Why Like Ike. We know that you will appreciate this program because it gives you a chance to say, I need to go down to the Eisenhower Library, Museum, and Boyhood Home and ask somebody about where that blacksmith stone is out in the yard out there.
That's right.
So all of those things are available here to see and to people to talk to like Pam and Tim and increase our understanding of the great benefit of Abilene being the home of Dwight David Eisenhower. Thanks for watching. I'm Dennis Weiss for Eagle Communications. You have a great day.